The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Final notice, $523,000 outstanding mortgage balance. I almost laughed. I didn't own a house. I rented a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery. I had never applied for a mortgage in my life. At first, I assumed it was a scam. I tossed the letter aside. Then the calls started. "Ma'am, you are in default on your property loan." "I don't have a property loan," I replied calmly. Your one click can keep these stories alive. Subscribe because every voice deserves to be heard. Yes, you do. Signed 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was finishing graduate school, working part-time, living paycheck to paycheck. There was no way. I requested documentation. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived. Inside, a mortgage agreement, my full legal name, my social security number, a signature that looked disturbingly similar to mine. Property address, a 3-bedroom home across town. Loan amount, $523,000. My hands went cold. The signature was close. Close enough that someone who didn't know me might accept it without question. But it wasn't mine. I compared it to my driver's license. The loop on the L was wrong. The pressure marks were inconsistent. Forgery. But who? I ran a property search online. The house was in foreclosure. And the listed occupant? My older cousin, Marcus. Marcus, who had always been the ambitious one. Marcus, who had asked me for copies of my ID years ago when he said he needed a reference for a rental application. Marcus, who suddenly stopped speaking to me around that same time. My stomach dropped. I didn't call him. I called a lawyer. The first thing my attorney said after reviewing the documents was simple: "This is identity theft." Apparently, the mortgage had been approved using my credit history. Payments were made for 2 years, then stopped. Late fees stacked. Interest ballooned. And now that foreclosure was looming, the bank was aggressively collecting. From me. Except I had never seen a cent of it. We immediately filed a fraud report. I froze my credit, filed a police report, sent formal dispute letters to the bank. The bank pushed back at first. The signature matches. "It doesn't," my lawyer replied. They requested forensic handwriting analysis. That's when things started unraveling. The notary stamp on the mortgage document expired at the time of signing. The IP address used for electronic document confirmation linked to Marcus's business office. The property tax bills sent to his email. Every trail pointed in one direction. When confronted by investigators, Marcus claimed it was a misunderstanding. Said I had agreed to help him qualify. I hadn't. And this time, I wasn't staying quiet to keep family peace. He was charged. The foreclosure was paused. My credit score, which had plummeted due to my defaulted mortgage, was restored after months of documentation and disputes. But the biggest shock wasn't the fraud. It was the betrayal. At a family gathering years earlier, I had trusted him enough to hand over copies of my documents without thinking twice. That small moment of trust cost me months of stress, legal fees, and sleepless nights. When the case finally closed, the judge made one thing clear. I bore no liability for the mortgage. Zero. $523,000 erased because it was never mine to begin with. Marcus avoided prison with a plea deal, but he lost his business license and faced restitution charges. Family members whispered that I overreacted. I didn't respond, because protecting your name, your credit, and your future isn't overreacting. It's survival. Debt collectors demanded $500,000 from me. But what they didn't realize was simple. I never signed anything, and I wasn't about to pay for someone else's crime. The weeks after filing the fraud report were exhausting. Even though I knew I hadn't signed that mortgage, the burden still felt like mine. Collection notices continued arriving while the investigation was pending. Automated systems don't pause just because you're innocent. Every time my phone rang from an unknown number, my chest tightened. My lawyer warned me early. Clearing identity theft takes persistence. Banks don't like admitting they made a mistake. He was right. The lender initially argued that I had been negligent with my personal information. They implied that because I once gave Marcus copies of my ID, I somehow shared responsibility. I didn't accept that. Trusting a family member isn't a contract to assume their crimes. We escalated the dispute to federal regulators and submitted a full forensic handwriting analysis. The results were definitive. The signature was not mine. Pressure inconsistencies, stroke order differences, and unnatural hesitations confirmed forgery. Then came the digital evidence. The electronic acknowledgement of the mortgage had been completed from an IP address registered to Marcus's office building. Timestamped. Logged. Traceable. That shifted everything. The bank's tone changed quickly once liability became clear. They removed the delinquent mortgage from my credit file, issued formal correction letters to credit bureaus, and sent written confirmation that I held zero responsibility for the debt. But restoring a credit score isn't instant. For months, I had been denied a car refinance and flagged for high-risk borrowing. Even after corrections, I had to manually dispute lingering errors. I learned more about consumer protection law in 6 months than I ever expected to. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved forward. Marcus claimed he thought I would understand. That it was temporary. That he planned to refinance before anyone noticed. Temporary doesn't apply to $523,000. In court, I kept my statement brief. I never consented to this loan. My identity was used without my knowledge. The financial and emotional damage has been significant. I didn't yell. I didn't dramatize. The facts were heavy enough. Some relatives stopped speaking to me afterward. They called it family business that shouldn't have involved law enforcement. But here's what they didn't understand. If I had stayed quiet, that foreclosure would have attached permanently to my name. My credit would have been destroyed for years. My ability to rent, buy, or even apply for certain jobs could have been compromised. Silence would have cost me my future. Once the case concluded and restitution was ordered, I finally felt something close to relief. Not because Marcus faced consequences, but because my name was clear. The experience changed how I handle everything. I locked my credit permanently unless actively applying for something. I set up identity monitoring alerts. I stopped casually sharing documents, even with people I love. Trust is no longer automatic. It's structured. The debt collectors once demanded $523,000 from me. Now, my credit report reads clean. And the most important line in the entire investigation wasn't the erased balance. It was this: borrower not responsible. Identity theft confirmed. That sentence restored more than my finances. It restored my control. A year later, my credit score was stronger than it had ever been. The alerts stayed on. The freezes stayed in place. Precaution became habit. Some relatives still think I went too far. I think I went far enough. $523,000 could have followed me for decades. Instead, I followed the evidence. I never signed that mortgage. And I never again let guilt convince me to carry someone else's debt, financially or emotionally.